on right now.
Okay, I want to begin because I've been remiss about mentioning something and someone. I've meant to, and I'm going to do it now. Thank Clarice Lofgren, who was the person who introduced me to you. She knew that I could really benefit from being at that point in time. It's low these many 8-10 years. I don't know how long it's been. She knew because of what I shared with her that you would be a good, if not ideal, person to invite into my life. And fast forward, it's been one of the richest relationships I've ever had. And I want to thank Clarice for putting it together. Thanks, Clarice.
Well, since you mention it, I will thank her as well for bringing us together. She was just at a retreat with me. I did my first public retreat in 2 years in Reading.
Ah, right. You were reticent about doing that.
Well, it was just challenging with all the precautions and everything, and we had everybody, testing beforehand and all this sort of stuff. And so,
was everybody on the same page, or?
Yeah, well, no, not everybody was on the same page. One person did not want to get tested, so I ended up having
not
to.
Tested?
Yeah, she didn't want to get tested, so I ended up uninviting. That person. But overall, it went very well, and we did it up at the Reading Meditation Center, which is a lovely space. And Clarice and her niece came as well for
nice
one of the days. But Clarice has been a really wonderful, committed student. First of all, I'll just say that, because she really has been steadfast in her practice and in her attendance, through on Zoom or whether it be in person, and then going to some amazing retreats, and then and we've become friends along the way too. So
I have the sense that she has the capacity for real clarity.
Yeah, I think she's like you and I. She's gone through her stuff, and she's quite aware of it. That's the other thing. She's done a lot of her own work, and she's a therapist as well in her own way, and so she's just a person who's on the journey. She's on the journey with us, right? And so and her bringing the two of us together was definitely clairvoyant on her part to bring you and I together.
But it was a caring thing to have done.
Yeah, I think for both of us. I think somehow she recognized that
maybe
these two people could
benefit. She's been around long enough to have accrued that kind of wisdom.
Right? Yeah. So thank you for mentioning her.
Starting
off our time together.
Now I feel better.
Oh, good. Got that off your shoulders.
I just I meant to do it, and I felt that it was sort of selfish not to do it, so I did it.
Yeah.
Now it's done.
Yeah.
So where are we? We haven't met in a while. You've been out away, and
away a little bit.
We've been out of contact more than is usual, and life has gone on for both of us.
Yeah, it keeps going, and I feel personally. I mean, I had a busy kind of end of the summer, which was nice in a way, because I sort of really try to take advantage of the outdoor activities and the outdoor teaching, and did some kind of interesting things with that in the end of the summer. And now I feel this kind of, okay, we're moving back indoors more, but we're also still dealing with the repercussions of a pandemic and what it's like to be indoors and gathering indoors with people.
And the uncertainty of it all.
And the uncertainty of it. And that, I have to say, is affecting me as well. Like, I'm having to really use my practices to be in the unknown, to being like, oh, I'm not exactly sure how this winter is going to play itself out. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to put
What about
my classes
that?
together.
What about that leads to you bringing your practices to bear? What is there something disturbing about that?
No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the practices. What I realize is I have to just keep noticing that how it feels to be uncertain, to be in that, it feels uncomfortable to be uncertain for an extended period of time. I'm usually pretty good at it for short periods of time, when I noticed, like, when I've been traveling and stuff like that, like, not knowing exactly where this town is or how I'm going to get there, and
Because
that kind of stuff.
that self-resolves.
Right, that resolves itself.
Right.
It's that kind of like,
but
okay,
this shit's open-ended.
This stuff is open-ended. This winter could go reasonably well, or it might not, and
so this feeling you're describing must also include fear.
Yeah, there's definitely, so that fear, anxiety, again, maybe you can help with, like, unpacking the difference between fear and anxiety, or how fear shows up. But it's just that fear of not really knowing which way to go in terms of my work, in terms of, okay, do I focus more online? Do I try to see if I can get people together, even though people are still kind of afraid to get together to some extent, or, so it's like, it's okay, how do I focus my energies and time? And you just realize you're still just trying things. Everything is kind of
I think that's where the anxiety is. The fear comes in when you contemplate the consequence of not being able to organize in a way that you want to.
Right.
It's the consequence.
So that's a good point.
The impact, financially, or the impact.
I think it's mostly honestly financially. It's like, okay, this is how I make my living, by bringing people together, whether it be one-on-one or in groups together, to experience yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breath work, just coaching, those kinds of things. And that takes interaction with people. And so how that's going to happen it's still ambiguous about that, which then goes back to, well, okay, how am I have some cushion, but I don't have an infinite cushion, right? That's going to keep me going. So.
And we need to be able to make some kind of reliable prediction about what to expect. And what you're saying is, and where the anxiety comes in, is that you have no grounds to make that prediction because too much is unknown.
Right. So I go back to, okay, I don't have that much control over that. So how do I just keep pulling myself back into the present, keep using my mindfulness in practices, and yoga, all these practices I've been doing for 20 years or so, to just say, you know what, I'm okay. I am okay, even though with all this stuff going on, and how can I clearly try to just make the best choices I can each day. That AA saying, one day at a time, right? It's like I am kind of living that proverb or whatever it is, that kind of like, okay, live.
By default, you're living it.
Yeah, and it's not like I don't have some plans and intentions, but a lot of it, like, I'm re-upping. I'm going to try to do the Peru retreat in March, which I'm excited about. But
what stands, is it you that stands in the way of that? You're wanting to be disciplined about it? Because it sounds like that's something that people are doing readily these days without being worried about. I mean, Connecticut is the best state in the union.
Yeah, no, I go to my gym, the Fitness Edge, right? And I go in there, and again, I'm just going to kind of share this personal experience or my personal interpretation of it. And there's probably like 150 people in there in the morning when I go in, right?
That's a lot.
It's a big space. Well, it's at least 100. It's quite a few people, and it's big though. So there's quite a bit of room. It's not like you're on top of each other. It's a big space. But I would say there's maybe 5 or 6 people that have a mask on, right? And including myself, just because, and it's not that, I'm vaccinated and everything. It's just I'm trying to like say, okay, well, just in case I'm asymptomatic, I don't want to give it to anybody, and maybe it's going to help me a little bit in not getting it. Not, I know that's not the primary reason for wearing a mask, but it probably helps a little. Because I don't want to get coronavirus, even though my chances are relatively low. It's like 6 times lower than if you're unvaccinated. But I also don't want to give it to anybody, right? Especially I'm going to go hopefully see my parents again over the holidays, and so I'm just that's where I am with it. It doesn't mean that I'm not wearing my mask now with you, and there are other places where I don't wear my mask. But when I'm in with a lot of people that I don't know, go to the grocery store, I still wear it, that kind of thing. And part of it for me though is a practice of wearing the mask when I'm in places where there are a lot of people that I don't know, inside with a lot of people, because I think we are, even with Connecticut doing so well, we got like 85% of people are vaccinated, something like that, of adults, something like that. That still leaves 15%, which means if you just take
but the infection rate is like 1.1.
Yeah, it's low. It's super low. However, we are just now really moving into the winter season. Right. And if you look, I mean, again, like maybe people don't do this, but I just read an article today about how is Europe doing. Europe is not doing that well. Yeah,
They're doing better than Russia.
They're doing a little bit better than Russia, but that's because the vaccination rates in Russia are super low. And but in Germany had like its most cases ever in the whole pandemic was like.
And
recently.
How does that?
Well, what that does is it says as we move farther into the winter season, as we go into this holiday season, I think even Connecticut is going to be hurting. It's going to be hurting again. It's just the way this vaccine works, right? And so it's just this kind of like, oh, okay, here we go again. This is my prediction, right? And when people then get anxious, I've got this, now I've got this, say it starts to go back up over Christmas and New Year's and that kind of thing, and then it takes a while, everything's delayed, right? So right about the time when people would have to be making their final decisions about going to Peru in March, by which time it may be coming back down again, maybe not, because we might still be in it like we were last year, they're going to be all anxious again, right? And so it's sort of just like, okay, I just want to do everything we can. Like
doing that, you're still going to be buffeted like a leaf in the wind,
right?
By these things outside of your
control. I don't have any control over what these other organizations do.
So isn't the goal? Isn't one of the things you can do is to let that go somehow?
That is my work. And then to just, this is where I'm saying I don't have control over this. Let me just be with it. And again, if it, I think I could. Again, it's dealing with that fear around the result of it. I'm actually like, if we don't go to Peru, it's like we don't go to Peru, right? But, again, these retreats have in the past been a big part of my business.
Right.
And so there goes that part of my business. All right, so how do I pay my rent in April and May? And, I'll get to that point. But then it's like these things become like, do I need to get a different job? That pops into my head. So even when I start thinking.
That's really frightening.
Right, so I'm thinking, all right, part of my mental energy thinks about, do I need to get another job? That takes away from my doing my job, because that's
right.
If I'm thinking, I need to get a different avocation, maybe that doesn't
it's a huge distraction
that isn't so reliant on people coming together.
That's a huge distraction.
That's a big distraction, right? And that can then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I heard somebody talking about inflation the other day. Once people expect inflation, then it's self-fulfilling. It's like you'll build inflation into your thinking, and it'll become self-fulfilling. And that's the big risk that the Fed is taking right now on inflation, by not raising interest rates. It's betting that inflation will start to go down before people start expecting it. And once they start expecting it, it'll just build on itself. and it's just, it's like, yeah. So.
Yet another thing outside of your control.
Right, another thing outside of my control. Yeah, it's just an interesting time, and it's
Well,
a time where I'm working with my own anxieties and insecurities and fears, and at the same time trying to help other people. I'm running a workshop this weekend on this whole thing, and it's like, it's no wonder I chose to teach this workshop on finding peace in challenging times. That's the title of the workshop. Finding peace in challenging times. Yeah. And yet I realize I'm teaching it because I'm experiencing it, and I'm experiencing, and it's not
Is that
like
something you plan to share with them, or you want to
This
keep
story?
You want to keep separate boundaries?
Oh, I'll share my own stuff as part of, like, why we might be, why they might be. I mean, the
Because
reason
if they hear it from you, it makes it more okay for them.
right, the
Which is
reason
therapeutic.
I'm having this conversation and wanted to talk about this whole thing with you today is I know I'm not the only one who's having these experiences of anxiety, or experiences of uncertainty, or experiences of fear about the unknown, or fear about the future, or fear about
No.
that's something that when I talk to people out there, there's a lot of people that are having.
I think
Yes.
we're in the throes of realizing things are not going back to where they
Right,
were.
right.
It's in the beginning, people would say, "Well, when are things going to get back to normal?" Then that sort of morphed into, "Well, when are things going to get back to the new normal?" And I'm here to report you're in the new normal now. The new normal is unfolding at your feet, and the decisions you make the new normal will coalesce around the decisions you make, because every decision you make, there's a decision that you didn't make.
And there's a cause
And you foreclose on that path.
Right, and then there's an effect to that decision, and right.
Right.
So I think, again,
So that's where you find yourself,
yeah.
and you shared with me, you're seeing a lot of that around you.
Well, maybe I am. I'm seeing it when I talk to people individually, but then I often wonder, am I paranoid? Because when I go to the gym and there's only 4 or 5 people wearing a mask, and that means that everybody else, the 100 or so people that are in there,
the heart of paranoia is irrationality.
Are thinking, oh, everything is fine, everything's good, no problem, pandemic's over.
But for you to be questioning your rationality, I think is a bridge too far.
I don't think
It's rational for you to have these thoughts.
Sure, I think it's
And because
rational.
there's so much unknown about it, and because this virus is invisible.
But for instance, like I'm trying to weigh out the risk, and honestly, I feel like okay, is this risk? What I always compare risk to around here is driving on I-95. Is my risk of getting hurt on I-95? Is it more or less than this? Because I drive on I-95, several times a week, no problem.
The question is the risk worth it?
And I say, okay, and so right, so going to the gym, for instance, this goes back, and is it worth getting coronavirus, and so that kind of thing. So it's like, all right, I mitigate that risk.
Right.
I still want to go to the gym, so
That's
I still go. I mitigate the risk, and I just I wonder about, okay, am I being, as I said, paranoid, overly precautious, because these infection rates right now are quite low in Fairfield County in particular. I mean, I am happy and pleased and even proud of us to a certain extent that we're a relatively conscious community here, and yet I still kind of I just wonder about it in terms of there's a lot of people now who just are kind of going about their day as though the pandemic is over, and I'm like,
Yeah, they're being
Are they not watching?
they're being mindless.
Are they not watching the news where you see that this thing is still bouncing around the world
Right.
and killing lots of people? You know, I mean, they said in this article that I read, you know, and again it was in Reuters. It's pretty reputable that there's a projection in Europe that 500,000 more people in Europe can die this winter. 500,000 more. You know, that's it's fucking a lot of people. Excuse my language.
So,
you know?
so there's nothing
right.
irrational about your fears.
Right. And my point is that fears.
So let go of the paranoia
right. So,
line.
but then fears then ultimately drive people's behavior.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, if we kind of shut down again, what does that mean for my work and my livelihoods? That's where the fear really comes in. You know.
Well, you'll find out.
Right. And I will find out exactly. And that's where
there's
my just being like, okay, just keep going, Greg. Try to make, you know, the mindful decisions.
And there's nothing you can be doing now that will attenuate whatever the outcome is then, because we just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it easier to let it go. I can't be
Yes.
bothered with that.
Yeah.
Or more accurately, I can't let that bother me. Because that's what it is. It's an entity that's tending to bother you.
You know, what happens, I think, with fear and anxiety is it has a sort of closing, shutting down effect. You know, it has a sort of, again, when I talk to some of these other people who are also sort of feeling, you can feel like this. When fear starts to get a hold of you, it starts to close you down. You start to get these blinders on to the possibilities of life, and you start to go into some type of survival mode. And survival mode is not that great. It's not a pleasant place to be.
No,
it's not an enlightening place to be.
You're trading freedom for a little more comfort.
Right, and that's my, and I look at this as like, I'm really about, okay, how can we stay expansive? How can we stay open to the possibilities, right? But if we're afraid, we ultimately aren't open to possibilities. We're actually cutting off possibilities because we're using fear as our primary
So then
driver.
maybe you need to dig down on the fear. Maybe, I mean, if you wanted to do something about the fear, other than just accept it, and that's a
I think I don't think it's accepted. Where I want to go is to transcend it. Is to sort of say, well, there it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. So it's not about getting over it. It's really about transcending it. It's like,
it's about including it in your way of being.
Right. It's the unknown is actually the truth of our reality most of the time. We don't know how things are going to work out. We don't know how relationships are going to work. We don't know how jobs are going to work out. We just delude ourselves sometimes into thinking we do. And right now I'm realizing, wow, that veil of delusion is pretty thin right now, and it's on some level a little terrifying. However, it is the truth. So let me be with the truth. Let me transcend it by saying I have the capacity to be with the possibilities, with the sunrise and the sunset and the beauty. And I went sailing yesterday with some friends. Part of the truth is
that we are the source of our own fears. Fear isn't a tangible, objective thing. We create it.
Absolutely. Yes, we create what we're afraid of. I mean, some people are afraid of snakes and some people aren't, right? So it's like
there's a biological imperative involved in that.
Right.
But you're talking about.
What's interesting to me is, again, I when I look at for myself, and I go to that gym. For some reason, this gym has become a little bit of a experiment for me. And I look around and I just see these people who seem completely comfortable.
Or oblivious.
okay, well maybe there's some joy in being oblivious or something, right? I'm not,
Ignorance is
I'm
bliss.
trying not to be too judgmental because I can go there. One of the things with fear, the other problem with fear that I really dislike, and I can go there too, is you can get very judgmental when you're in fear. Judgmental of others. How come others aren't complying? How come others aren't, and I'm actually trying to stay open. It's like, well, maybe they're seeing things in a way which is more enlightened than me, more in tune with reality of the situation, and more courageous even. Like,
Or more fatalistic. More fatalistic. If you listen to Fox, people you hear a lot that God's going to take care of them, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. They don't talk about the probabilities and the science.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's, we're all snowflakes, not in the modern woke sense. We're all unique individuals, and our way of accepting and being with any of this stuff, you can go around and try to attribute and whittle a square peg to fit a round hole, but everybody's coming from their own reality, whether it's a defiance or it's a ignorance or they figure the probability is worth it, the risk is worth it. What's that got to do with you? What do you care?
What they think?
Well, certainly what do you care what they think, but what do you care what they do?
Well, okay, that's a really good question. So I go back.
Never mind why they do it.
I go back to why do we, why do we really have seatbelts? Why do we really have stop signs? Okay, why do we have those things?
To protect us from ourselves. I'm a big believer. Don't be making no laws to protect me from me, but stop signs protect you from me. Seatbelt just protects me from me.
Right. So.
And motorcycle helmets.
Right, but it also. But it also, because of the way our healthcare system works and all that sort of stuff, when you hurdle yourself through the windshield,
oh, I see.
I pay for your health to get fixed, and $500,000 bill doesn't land in your lap,
right?
And it lands in all of our laps, right? So
good point.
And there's just a social cost to injury and to premature death. I mean, we're all supposedly contributing to society. We're worker bees on some level. There goes another, resource out the window, right? Literally out the window, right? So we're trying to protect our valuable resources through these.
And the cost of that rules. Is individual freedom.
Right. But also, I really do like the stop sign analogy because, not wearing a mask or not getting vaccinated, in my view, is kind of like saying, I'm going to ignore stop signs. I'm just going to ignore them, all right? So if we know that 15% of people are going to ignore stop signs, right? Not only does that make there going to be more accidents at intersections, right? But it's going to slow everybody else down. Because what's going to happen is you're going to stop at the stop sign, and you're going to look and see, oh, here's this car coming.
I got to wait to see what he's going to do. Is this
one of the knuckleheads that's going to just drive right through? So now I have to wait to see if they're going to stop. And oh, by the way, here comes another car over here. We got to wait to see if they stop.
How are you applying this to what we're talking about?
When I talk about either, it's okay when we don't comply with things which are socially and collectively in our best interest, then it actually slows everything down. It slows everything. Fewer people go to. I did this retreat, and with all the precautions that I had about 10 people each day at the retreat. Right, 2 weeks ago. 2 years ago, I did basically the same retreat. I had 18 people both days. I actually attribute all of that to the pandemic. Because it's sort of just like the whole system is just moving slower. The retreat itself was in just as nice a place, close. It was like it's just that the whole program is moving slower.
So
and so my frustration, and again, I don't have all this control over it. Is like, okay, you know.
No, but you know you need to be adaptive in some way.
Right.
And you're in the throes of figuring out
right.
what choices to make.
Everything is a bit harder to do in the type of work that I both enjoy and I think I do well and I'd like to do more of, but it's like, wow, this is like, it's twice as hard.
You've got to be more.
It's twice as hard to get the same amount of results.
You've got to
it's
be
like,
nimble.
You know, and that's not easy to hold, you know, and I really, part of where my practice really comes in is not being, you know, is being understanding and compassionate with people like who are unvaccinated and with people who aren't wearing masks and stuff like that in crowded places. That's where a lot of my practice comes in too, is like,
it would have to, lest you get angry.
right, but part of that anger is not at them, it is at all that we're going through, right? We are all going through.
Well, you're
time.
primed to be angry.
You're
primed
yeah.
to be short fused.
Yeah. But I think, you know, honestly, I get that everybody. This is where I go like that. Why I'm kind of sharing and want to share this today is because I think I'm not unusual. I think that this level of like kind of like of dynamic tension with what's going on and obviously wanting the pandemic to end and how, but still dealing with it in some way. I think it's, you know, there'll be lots of long-term state case studies on the mental and emotional and spiritual effects of this pandemic.
And you're also saying that you're witnessing it outside of yourself. You're
absolutely.
Witnessing it with everybody.
Yeah, I think I've saw it. Yes, saw it in the people who were coming to the retreat. I see it with students who have come back to work with me. I've heard it from students who I've talked to, who I've reached out to, who I haven't seen in a long time. Like they're in a kind of almost like a shutdown isolation mode still, you know. And so it's having pretty intense effects on not, again, I'm not saying everybody. Some people are fine, but
we're exhausted at being in this place of not having the information we need to make important decisions. So we're frozen by lack of information and indecision. We're suspended.
Yeah. And suspension is unmotivating. I mean, you know, the best analysis that I got for why the elections went the way they did, was it yesterday? 2 days ago? You know, in terms of kind of somewhat of a Republican wave, is really that the Democratic base is just, it's not motivated. You know, it's like all this kind of this suspension.
That's
It's
right.
feel like with the stuff in Congress
That's
and everything
right.
that's going on, they're just feeling like they're in suspension. Well, suspension doesn't motivate you. You know, it doesn't motivate you to go out and say, I want more of this. Give me more suspension. Yes. You know, that's not going to get you out to vote, you know. And so, you know, it's like, yeah. It's like, you know, I think that you can see how if you're in the opposing party, delay tactics are your number one tool. Because if you just keep other people from being successful, you by default will be successful. So, and
it looks like that's part of their strategy. That's for sure.
You know, and so, but my point is that feeling of suspension over time. I think we can all deal with it for short periods of time.
That's right.
But when it goes on for months,
that's right.
on end,
demoralizing.
Exactly, it's demoralizing, and that's
where we are, and that's what you're seeing.
That's what I'm seeing. That's to some extent what I'm experiencing
Me
firsthand.
Too. Me too.
And this is where, again, I'm so grateful for the resources that I have to take care of myself, for the awareness of this, to take care of myself, to be doing
the tools,
my meditation, my breath work, my yoga, my therapy. I've got a bag of tools that I'm just using on a regular basis. My exercise, my getting out, my talking to friends, talking to people who I love, like you. I mean, these are real resources, that are super helpful. And I feel, I guess one of the things is just I feel really compassionate with anyone who doesn't have a kind of, some of these resources, and I think, you and I are here as part of those resources. We're here for each other. We're here for people out there. We're here for our students, our clients. We're helping each other. And part of my sharing my story and my vulnerability,
in this together.
Yeah, my vulnerability is that it's not that I don't have gifts to share, because I do, and that's part of what actually sustains me, is being able to share my gift. Being able to pull off that retreat 2 weeks ago was great. It was an amazing experience, and it was a triumph, exactly, for everybody, for myself, for them. It was a wonderful experience, and I think I know we all got a lot out of it. Got a lot of great feedback about it, but it was like a triumph. And so it's like, yeah, we're going through this together. We're all. I don't know anybody who, if you scratch below the surface, is saying, "Oh yeah, no, this pandemic, it's not really affecting me at all. I'm fine." If you scratch, they might say, how people say, "Oh, I'm fine," when you ask them how they're doing. But if you scratch at all, they're like, "Oh no, this has been tough, and it's still pretty tough. It's pretty, not that some, it can be fine on some levels, and things are better, thank goodness, than they were for many of us around here now at this moment. But again, as soon as you step back and step out and see how this virus is working, it's like it just cycles around, the cycles will get less intense, but it's not over yet.
But all we do about that is just notice it. I don't know that we internalize or choose what to think, how it affects us.
I'm not sure if we choose how it affects us. It affects us by the filters through which we tend to see things, in terms of how is this going to affect us? How is it, and what are our opinions of it? I think it's it's an interesting phenomena, just in what it's also tied into a lot of what's kind of going on around our fears. When we start making too many choices, or much is based on our fears rather than our possibilities, then I think that we end up in places which again become self-fulfilling. And I'll give you another example that's going on right now. Again, don't mean to get too much into politics, but it's happening. So there's this case right now, I think it was yesterday, before the Supreme Court, about whether the concealed carry law in New York is unconstitutional or not, right? And there's a pretty good chance that it's going to get struck down, which means that every Joe Bag of Donuts in this United States can now start carrying a gun concealed wherever the heck they want. Basically anywhere.
Well,
that's where that is going. They'll carve out few exceptions, but it'll be difficult. The Supreme Court is going to have to carve them out, and because or else it's just going to leave it into sort of a free for all. But my point is, that really going to make life better for us now? Like, okay, I'm afraid, so the way to deal with being afraid is to carry around a pistol, so that in case something happens, that's the way we want to deal with our fear, is to carry around handguns, which again, was already 40,
I can answer that question.
Right.
No.
Right, but that's what some people seem to want. You know what I mean? It's like rather than sort of say, how do we reduce gun violence. It's more like that is not going to reduce gun violence. So there's no way that's going to lead to a reduction in gun violence.
No.
And yet
it's going to lead to carnage.
It's going to lead to carnage, but this is tied into what's going on with this pandemic, and it's sort of like my right to.
Oh, I see what you mean. I
know that there's somebody in that gym.
I've got a right to not wear a mask. I've got a right to defy.
I got a right to not wear a mask, and I have a right to not wear a mask and be unvaccinated and walk around in this gym and work out in this gym.
And I have a right to carry a gun. And that's the equivalency you're talking about.
If there's 100 people in that gym, there are at least a couple people that are in that situation, that are unmasked and unvaccinated, right? And so what they've decided is I have the right to do this.
And that right trumps the greater good.
That right trumps the greater good of either at least wearing my mask, not being here at all. Like I can be unvaccinated and hang out in my house and go work out outside and that kinds of stuff. But as soon as I go into a public space, I'm now. It's kind of like I'm now driving through stop signs, and that's okay. I can drive through stop signs because probably nothing's bad's going to happen, probably, but the chances are way greater than if I stop at stop signs. They're 6 times greater.
So
basically.
What about that? What about that?
And
you're just describing the truth of what is.
I think it's this balancing again against and again I'm a big fan of individualism in the sense of what individually feels right to me and how can I act on it until it starts to particularly phically harm other people.
Yeah, that's the old law school saw that you're allowed to make a fist and punch. Your right to punch ends at my nose.
Right. You could even threaten me, but if you
that's assault.
Yeah, I mean, but if you actually hit me, and it's like I just find it so interesting that we give so much leniency to individual rights to some form of kind of almost like violence in some way, and it's like it's just and at the same time I'm a big people should be able to express themselves. People should be able to I think about like, okay, I'll give you this example.
Been that tension.
I say if I want to go to the gym and I want to work out naked, right? Like who am I hurting? But I'm probably gonna be at least asked to leave, if not arrested, right? But who am I really hurting? I'm just standing there naked, Like, am I hurting anybody? No, but for some reason that's an offense. That's an offense of which we can, collectively agree. Oh, we need to shut that down. But somebody potentially walks in with a deadly disease, and it's like, oh, we can't put any constraints on that whatsoever. Or even, I don't know. It's just interesting to me.
The imperfections of it all.
Yeah, and so that adds to again a sense. Again, I bring that story or that analogy or that up because that adds to our confusion, which then adds to our uncertainty. There's like these contradictory things. Oh, I can't stand naked here, but I can walk around in here.
Pretty soon with a gun.
With a gun. Pretty soon with a gun. I can walk around in here with a gun, but I can't stand naked here. Right.
Can't conceal a gun when you're naked.
And that I just find really interesting. Just and a little confusing.
Well, disturbing, obviously.
Yeah.
It's disturbing to you.
Yeah.
And because what? The law and democracy isn't neat, isn't rational.
Right.
Isn't fair.
Well, I also think that it's you go down this road of collective good, and you have to be careful too, because collective.
Who decides?
Who decides exactly, and how it gets decided. I mean, you can bet the Chinese government runs on the notion of collective good, right? And
For the few.
Well, I mean, when you've got 1.5 billion people, if a couple 100 million are left out, who do you care, right? You know, like, so I mean, it's like, I'm not saying, like, from that perspective you could say, you know, they have these terrible, you know, issues with I can't remember the Mongols, something, like, you know, the people, there's this whole ethnic group in China that gets discriminated against quite badly.
Uyghurs?
So I'm sorry, yes, I think that's it. Any case, listen, I don't know enough about China to really, I'm not an expert at all on it, but my point is that you have to be careful with the notion of collective good, because who gets to decide?
Chooses, right.
Who gets to decide? And that's where I think, hopefully, democracy can.
Well, that's, you know, where certainly the Constitution sets it out.
Right, is how we go about making our choices and making our laws and that kinds of stuff. But I don't know. It just seems like
Louis Brandeis said one of the great freedoms is the freedom to be let alone. That's the penultimate freedom.
Right.
To just be let alone from vis-a-vis government.
I listen. I couldn't agree more with that. I actually think that the freedom, but there's a caveat in that. Let alone means to be alone. Okay, if you want to be let alone, if you want to be unvaccinated with guns a-bling on your 2-acre farm by yourself and never go anywhere, God bless you. Have fun. Go for it. And run around naked. Go for it. It's when you go to the grocery store or you go to the gym or you go to the church. You're not alone anymore. Screw your leave me alone thing. You don't have that right anymore to say leave me alone, because you now have decided to engage.
You've made a choice
with society
that obviates your being left alone.
Right. And once you've made that choice of,
but
like,
that choice
I
is the individual
really
citizen.
Right.
The Constitution says government isn't allowed to violate your being left alone if you're making choices to be left alone.
Right, but here's the go. You can be left alone and smoke 6 packs of cigarettes a day and run around with your guns and, you know, do whatever you want. But as soon as you say, I need to go to the hospital now to deal with my lung cancer, you're now, like, in the system, which is now going to pay $500,000 to take care of your, you know, so this notion of just leave me alone, it's a little far because nobody
sure is complicated.
that we know is totally off the grid saying I'm willing to live with all of the consequences of my choices. You know,
it surely is complicated. Right.
And so as soon as you engage with the rest of the system, you now have to sort of, it's a compromise between what, you know, and that's something which I think this notion of individual rights, it's like we don't really have any concept of the responsibility of freedom. There's a huge amount of responsibility that comes with freedom, and we're not really grappling with that side. We just say, I just want to be free. I want to free. I want to wear my mask. I want to be free to carry a gun wherever I want. I want to be free. I want to be free. It's like, no, that's not how society works. You know? So, I mean, you can do that. You know, that's why we do have laws about, you know, freedom, you know, within one's home. People can have, you know, most states, I think all states have, like, you can have a gun in your own home. You know, that can be problematic too, but I understand why we have that. As soon as you take that out into a crowd, that changes the equation quite dramatically.
You should take it to a bar.
Right. Well, that's what part of the argument is about going to bars or going to protests. What if you were to go to a political protest and you could have concealed guns?
It has been said that January 6th there would have been a lot more dead bodies January 6th if in Washington D.C. you have permission to carry.
Absolutely. I mean, you can just see
since you don't have permission to carry in Washington D.C., saved lives.
I can't imagine that's not. And think about how many other political protests there've been. Black Lives Matter protests and other protests that if people regularly carried guns, and that it would just, get out of control. And then we seem to be, there's this notion, oh well, we're okay with that because there's this,
we're preserving
freedom.
the individual right.
Right, we're preserving the individual right to self-defense,
Which is questionable if you ask
right.
me.
It's really questionable. It's
The
really
Second
questionable.
Amendment is
Well, the Second Amendment, I mean, I think we're the only constitution in the world with that amendment in there, but I could be wrong about that.
probably,
Yeah, but we're certainly one of the very, very, very few.
and it was never meant to apply to individuals. It was only, individuals vis-a-vis militia, period.
Mm-hmm.
Just read the fucking Second Amendment and you can't interpret it otherwise, I don't think. Anyway.
Anyways, we're getting a little bit astray, and we've been talking for almost an hour.
Okay.
How would you like to conclude our journey into, like, if we were to say something about dealing with uncertainty, anxiety, fear during this time, what's one piece of advice that you would give people?
Uncertainty and fear. I think it's worthwhile to understand how naturally occurring uncertainty and fear are. And anything that is naturally occurring can't be bad. It can lead to unhappiness, but the great Fred Rogers said, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable is manageable. That's how I'd conclude.
That's good. I like it. Fred Rogers. That's
Fred
awesome.
Rogers,
The great Fred Rogers.
1976. I love that man.
He's a wonderful man. So my piece of advice is to create some safe place for yourself. Somewhere, probably in your home, could be in your bedroom, could be in some other spot, and just give yourself a few minutes a day, if preferably maybe twice a day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, to just sit and breathe and notice your breathing, and maybe use a mantra of, I am at peace with myself as I am. I am at peace with myself as I am. And just sit with that for maybe 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. Notice the feeling of your breath. Notice your breath as your lungs
And
and
the
body
calming
expand.
that would produce.
Yeah. That gives me, I do that, a couple times a day. It gives me a refuge. It gives me a place of
An oasis.
okayness that's quite beautiful and remarkable, and I can go back to it whenever I need. I can even do it for a minute or so, like in the middle of the day. I can just sit in my car and parked and do that because I've kind of built up a little reservoir of it. I just find that there are these somatic practices that have to do with the body, because we hold all this stress shows up in our body, as you know. If we can actually go back in through our body, we can relieve some of that stress in the body, and that then actually kicks in these endorphins that actually make us feel a lot better, and we just feel less anxious. And so at least that's my experience, and so I'm going to leave on that note of a few minutes of deep breathing and saying positive affirmations to yourself twice a day. Okay? Rock on, brother. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you.